Hi friends, Michelle Houghton here, Copic in the craft room. We've got a new video. I am playing with Rosie and Bernie from Stampingbella. So I've owned this stamp for a really long time. This is not one of their new ones, but I have had this one because I love this pair. They are just so adorable, this little girl and her unicorn. So this was a perfect opportunity to pull that out and color this up. Now I do know they've kind of continued this series or have multiple sets of Rosie and Bernie. So any of those would work with some of the color combinations I'm using today. So feel free to color along with whichever one you have. On Bernie, I'm going to use a BV20 and colorless blender to fill in most of his body. Or to give shape to most of his body. So I'm going to say he is white, and I'm giving him some shape and form by adding some shadows coming in from the sides, getting that roundness to him. And this is one I did not do a lot of experimenting with. I didn't test colors out. You're going to see some playing around on his muzzle because I'm not totally content with how that turns out to start. I think I end up in a place that's a little bit better. But just giving some shape, some roundness to him. And then I'm coming in with a colorless blender and I'm going from the white area and pushing back into that BV20. If you've played around with that color in the past or have seen me play around with this color, it does a really fun effect in that the violet gets pushed, because that's what the colorless blender does. Remember, it's pushing the ink. But then the blue sits pretty tight to the paper, so we're left with this kind of shadow effect of it going from white into this very light blue into that violet, which I love and is kind of a fun color to play with. So I pull it out frequently. It is a favorite. So I'm going to fade that to white, so it goes from those violets into blues into white. And as you'll watch that colorless blender right now, you can see that wet area. It'll fade and it'll just look white again. So then I had to decide. You can see this is all in real time because I'm figuring out that I can do a lot more memory-wise and uploading and downloading with my new internet speed here in Alaska. But you're seeing me in real time kind of debate with myself about what color things are going to be. I did not pre-plan this at all, so I apologize for that. So I can't even remember what we're doing next. I think I'm working on his muzzle, so I'm going to come in with that colorless blender and wet that area and a little bit in the interior of his ear. And I'm going to use an E93 to add just a little bit of peachy pink in both of those areas. And this is where I end up kind of fudging back and forth on his muzzle. I'm like, okay, now he looks like he has a two-tone muzzle. And that was certainly not my intent. So you'll see me come back and play with that throughout the video. So I apologize for that, but here you are getting to see what I usually do with a brand new image that I haven't played with before, and I'm just experimenting with right from the start. So I'm going to do his little hooves and his horn more like a gold. And so I've got a Y21 that I'm coming in from that bottom edge, and I'm coming in those individual sections because I'm going to try to make it look like it's those pieces kind of wrapped into that cone shape. And then I'm also going to do his little hooves. And I realize as I'm doing this that I have a fourth hoof and a fourth leg that I did not color. So I am going to color the hoof. I'll come back and get the leg with more blue violet and colorless blender. Every once in a while on an image, you'll do this yourself, that you start coloring the details and you find out, oh, there's another foot here. There's another leg here. There's that I didn't see. I thought it was hers originally, but no, she's got one and another pointed outwards. That has to be a horse, or in this case, a unicorn. And then Y28 is going to darken and help me add more shape to that horn so that we can see that spiral twist happening. So I'm going in at the edge, at the bottom edge, kind of along that side, and then kind of along the bottom of each section and curving it up along the top edge a little bit, just adding to that spirally shape. Just a dot of the Y28 on each of the hooves. And then I'm going to soften that with my Y21. And if you needed to, you can also come back in then with a colorless blender at the end of that and finish up the horn and hooves. The mane I'm going to do in a series of violets. So I'm going to let you just kind of watch this section. It's going to be V12, V04, and V17. It's just like long straight hair. Think about where it starts, and you're going to come from there, run along the lines. So the growth lines, you want to follow those directions, and then layer that up using less as you get darker. I'm going to bring the BV20 back over, and I'm going to create some cast shadows underneath the mane and underneath Bernie's muzzle or nose. And then I try to use the same color to create almost a cast shadow underneath the horn as well. And I did some from the body onto the legs. The BV20 is too light, and so when I started coloring on the mane, you're going to see almost a bleaching effect where it's getting lighter instead of darker. So I'm going to switch markers and use a BV23 to create a cast shadow where that horn is kind of creating that shadow on his mane. On to Rosie, we're going to do some very pale red skin tones. It's an R000 that I'm basing this in. This is not a realistic skin tone. This is very pinky, very light, very pale. I'm doing her legs, her hands, her face. Don't forget her little ears. And then I'm going to switch to an R01, create that roundness, create that ball of her head, sphere shape. So I'm coming in from the sides and around the bottom edge and then up, kind of coming down from the top, creating that sphere or ball shape into the interior of her ears and then bottom edge of her hands, kind of picking one side of her leg. The one that's sticking out is easy. You go along the bottom edge. The other one I just did the back, along the back edge. It's too thin to create more of that cylinder shape. Smoothing that out with an R000 again. So really simple, keeping it very light and simple. I'm going to use a little bit of R81 just to add a little blush to her little cheeks, way out on the edges. Again, remember these little faces aren't necessarily realistic, so we can put the blush way out on those edges. If you need to, you can come back in with your lightest marker. Just because of how far that pink has gone, for me, that was the easiest one to kind of ease that in. You could also do a tip to tip technique because we're using such a small area for that blush. The BV20 is coming out again, this time to do cast shadows on Rosie underneath her hair, a little bit on her skin, like where her sleeve overlaps her hands, and then her dress overlaps her legs. And then I'm going to switch to some RVs for her little dress. RV32 and RV34 are going to add a little bit of shape, really subtle, onto her little dress. For some cast shadows under her hands and her sleeve, like onto the dress itself, we're going to have to go darker one more time with that BV23 so that it works on top of that fabric color. Now, if I'd had a stamping platform and got a very rich black on her hair, I probably would leave this alone, but I didn't. And so I had to do my single stamp. And so it didn't get super rich. So I'm using a little bit of that BV20 in those highlight areas, and I'm using Colorless Blender to soften that up a little bit. But then I'm also going to come in with a C9 and go over some of those darker patches, the little lines that the artist has done. So I'm not adding any lines. I'm just getting some of those lines darker, and I'm not trying to hit every one. I'm just trying to make it look a little more black versus gray, because right now you don't have any of that real deep contrast since I did not get my ink super, super dark. So I'm coming in, hitting a few of those. I'm not adding anymore. I'm just going over the existing lines, and I won't hit every one. All right, yay, these two are so cute. Thank you, Stampingbella. I love this pair. I will do more of them in the future. If you haven't had a chance, check out scrapweaver.com for things that are going on, keeping abreast of classes that are going to happen and aren't going to happen. Hey, all of you, have a happy, colorful day, and I'll see you next week.